The freight yards of Ashford, Montana, stretched out like the skeleton of some forgotten industrial giant. Rusted rail cars sat abandoned on side tracks, their paint faded to a uniform rust orange that blended with the winter sunset. The mountains beyond the town rose in jagged peaks, their slopes heavy with pine and silence. It was the kind of place people passed through on their way to somewhere else, a town that had seen better days, when the timber mills still ran and the trains carried more than occasional cargo. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cross had come here seeking exactly what Ashford offered: nothing. After 16 years as a Navy SEAL, with deployments that had taken him from the deserts of Iraq to the jungles of the Philippines, he'd earned this 30-day leave. His body carried the evidence of his service: a surgical scar on his left shoulder from a compound fracture, another on his abdomen from shrapnel, and the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch. The kind that lived in your bones and whispered in the quiet moments that you'd seen too much, done too much, lost too much. He'd rented a small cabin at the edge of town, a place with no cell service and a wood-burning stove that required actual work to keep burning. The realtor had apologized for the primitive conditions. Ethan had signed the lease on the spot. This was exactly what he needed, a place where the only mission was to wake up, chop wood, and watch the snow fall. His only companion was Ranger, a 4-year-old Belgian Malinois who had been his partner on his last 3 deployments. Ranger was 85 pounds of trained muscle and pure loyalty, with a dark sable coat and intelligent amber eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his surroundings. He'd been trained for explosives detection and tactical support, but after taking a bullet grazing his flank during an extraction in Syria, the Navy had medically retired him. The wound had healed, but the regulations were clear. Ethan had signed the adoption papers the same day, refusing to let his partner disappear into the system. Now they were both trying to figure out what peace looked like. The late afternoon light was fading fast as Ethan walked the perimeter of the cabin, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. The temperature was dropping quickly, the way it did in the mountains when the sun started its descent. Ranger padded beside him, moving with only the slightest hitch in his gait, a reminder of the wound that had ended his military service but not his purpose. "Last check, boy," Ethan murmured, his voice a low rumble that carried the quiet authority of a man who'd spent years leading teams into chaos. Ranger's ears swiveled toward him in acknowledgement, then returned to their constant surveillance of the forest line. Ethan was a man built for function over form. At 6 foot, one with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular frame, he moved with an economy of motion that spoke of intense, discipline. His dark brown hair was cut in a tight fade, and his face was all hard angles. A strong jaw shadowed with a few days of stubble, high cheekbones, and eyes the color of cold steel that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. He was 34. But the lines around his eyes, and the gravity in his expression, made him seem older, as if the weight of his experiences had compressed time itself. He checked the woodpile one final time, his hands automatically assessing the stack with the same precision he'd once used to check ammunition supplies. Enough for 3 days, maybe 4 if he was conservative. The weather report he'd caught on the radio that morning had mentioned a storm system moving in, but out here, you didn't trust forecasts. You prepared for the worst and hoped for the best. As he turned back toward the cabin, Ranger suddenly froze. His body went rigid, his head cocked at an angle, ears pitched forward with laser focus. It wasn't his alert for danger. Ethan knew that posture intimately. This was something else. Curiosity. Confusion. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ranger took 3 steps toward the eastern tree line, then stopped. He looked back at Ethan, then forward again, a whine building deep in his throat. It was the sound he made when something didn't fit the pattern, when the world wasn't behaving the way his training said it should. Ethan's senses sharpened instantly. The switch from civilian to operator was automatic, a light flipping in his brain. His posture straightened, his breathing slowed, and his eyes began scanning the darkening forest with tactical precision. He saw nothing out of place, just pine trees heavy with snow, the jagged outline of the mountains, and the fading orange glow of sunset painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. But Ranger knew something. And Ethan had learned a long time ago that when a military working dog alerted to something invisible, you listened. "Show me," he said quietly. Ranger immediately started moving toward the tree line, his gait purposeful despite the old injury. Ethan followed, his hand instinctively checking for the sidearm he no longer carried on his hip. Old habits. Out here, he was just a civilian trying to decompress. But the warrior never truly left. It just waited beneath the surface, ready to be called back into service. They walked in silence, Ranger leading them deeper into the forest as the last light of day bled from the sky. 3 miles away, in the heart of Ashford's modest downtown, 12-year-old Maya Reeves sat in the corner booth of the Copper Kettle Diner, her math homework spread out before her like an unsolvable puzzle. She chewed on the end of her pencil, her dark eyes unfocused, not really seeing the fractions and decimals that were supposed to be her ticket to passing 6th grade. Maya was a small girl for her age, with long black hair usually pulled back in a practical ponytail and a face that carried a seriousness that didn't belong on someone so young. She wore a worn purple jacket that was slightly too big for her, a hand-me-down from her older cousin, and jeans with patches on the knees. Her backpack, sitting on the seat beside her, was covered in pins and patches, a wolf, a mountain range, and a small American flag. She'd been coming to the diner every day after school for the past 3 months, ever since her grandmother had taken the evening shift at the truck stop out on Route 40. The owner, Mrs. Chen, a kind woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and permanent smile lines around her eyes, had told Maya she could do her homework there as long as she wanted. Sometimes Mrs. Chen would bring her hot chocolate without being asked, the kind with real whipped cream on top. But today, Maya couldn't concentrate. Her mind kept drifting to the conversation she'd overheard 2 days ago. She'd been walking home from school, taking the shortcut through the old freight yards, a route her grandmother had explicitly forbidden, but which cut 15 minutes off her walk. She'd been hurrying, her head down against the wind, when she'd heard voices coming from inside one of the abandoned railway maintenance buildings. The door had been slightly ajar, and the voices had been angry. Maya had frozen, instinct telling her to stay quiet and hidden. "I don't care what you have to do," a man's voice had growled. "He's asking questions. He's been to the courthouse, the sheriff's office, poking around in things that aren't his business. We clean this up, or everything we've built falls apart." "What about the dog?" another voice had asked, younger, uncertain. "The dog goes too. I want them both gone. Make it look like an accident. The freight line runs through here tomorrow night at 11. Put them on the tracks. By the time anyone finds them, it'll be too late to ask questions." Maya's blood had gone cold. She'd pressed herself against the rusted metal wall of an old boxcar, her heart hammering so loud she was sure they'd hear it. She'd stayed frozen until the voices faded, and she heard a truck engine start up and drive away. She'd run home and told her grandmother everything. But her grandmother, exhausted from working double shifts and struggling to pay the bills after Maya's parents had died in a car accident 2 years ago, had looked at her with tired, worried eyes. "Maya, honey, you probably misheard. People around here don't do things like that. Maybe it was a movie or something on someone's phone. Grandma, I know what I heard. Enough." Her grandmother's voice had been sharp, but her eyes were frightened. "You stay away from those freight yards. You hear me? I don't want you mixed up in anything. We keep our heads down. That's how we survive." Now, sitting in the diner with her untouched homework, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she should do something. But what could a 12-year-old girl do? Who would believe her? The sheriff's department was small. Just 3 officers for the whole county, and one of the voices she'd heard had mentioned the sheriff's office specifically. The bell above the diner's door chimed, and Maya glanced up. A group of men in work clothes entered, their voices loud and jovial. She recognized one of them, a tall man, with a blonde buzz cut and a scar across his cheek. He worked at the rail yard. He was one of the voices she'd heard that night. Maya's stomach clenched. She grabbed her backpack and quickly gathered her homework, stuffing it inside without organizing it. Mrs. Chen looked up from behind the counter, concern crossing her face. "Leaving already, sweetheart? I was just about to bring you. I have to go," Maya said, her voice small. "Sorry, Mrs. Chen. Thank you." She pushed through the door before the kind woman could ask questions, stepping out into the cold evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The freight yards loomed in the distance, dark and foreboding. Tomorrow night, 11 o'clock. The words echoed in her mind. She had less than 24 hours. CTA numero uno. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The man with the scarred cheek was named Dale Pritchard, and he ran Ashford with an iron fist hidden in a work glove. To the casual observer, he was just the foreman at the Ashford Rail Freight Company, a blue-collar guy who'd worked his way up from track maintenance to management. He had a wife, 2 kids, and a modest house on Maple Street. He coached Little League in the summer and helped organize the town's 4th of July barbecue. But Dale Pritchard had a second business, one that had made him far wealthier than his modest house suggested, and that business was now under threat. Dale sat in the back corner of the copper kettle, his back to the wall, always to the wall, as he surveyed his crew. There were 5 of them tonight. Tommy Weeks, a wiry man in his late 20s, with nervous energy and a tendency to talk too much. Hank Morrison, a hulking brute who'd done time for assault before Dale had given him a second chance. Ray Chin, no relation to the diner's owner, a quiet man with dead eyes who handled the more delicate aspects of their operation. And finally, Marcus Lowe, Dale's second-in-command, a former military police officer who'd been dishonorably discharged for reasons he never discussed. "Everyone clear on tomorrow night?" Dale asked, his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry beyond their booth. The men nodded. "This has to be clean," Dale continued, his pale blue eyes moving from face to face. "No mistakes, no evidence. Just another tragic accident. Some drifter wandering the tracks at the wrong time." "What if he talks before then?" Tommy asked, his leg bouncing with anxiety. "What if he's already—" "He hasn't," Marcus interrupted, his voice flat and certain. "I've been watching him. He's at that cabin 3 miles out, middle of nowhere. No visitors, no phone calls. He's alone." Dale nodded slowly. "What about the dog?" "Military working dog," Marcus said. "Belgian Malinois. Retired after taking a hit overseas. The dog stays with him. We take them both." Hank grunted. "I don't like killing dogs." Dale's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped another degree. "You don't have to like it, Hank. You just have to do it. This man has been asking questions about freight manifests that don't match shipping records. He's been to the county clerk's office looking at property deeds. He's a former SEAL, which means he's trained to notice patterns, and he's noticed ours." The table fell silent. The weight of what they were planning settled over them like a heavy blanket. The truth was that Dale Pritchard and his crew had turned the Ashford freight yards into a crucial way station for a much larger operation. Shipping containers that arrived on the freight trains didn't just carry lumber and manufacturing supplies. Hidden among the legitimate cargo were crates of military-grade weapons, stolen from a corrupt supply depot 3 states away, and shipments of fentanyl precursor chemicals that were processed in a hidden facility in the mountains before being distributed across the Northwest. The operation had been running smoothly for 3 years. The local sheriff, a man named Warren Hodge, was on Dale's payroll, his mortgage mysteriously paid off, and his daughter's college tuition covered by an anonymous scholarship. The county clerk, a timid woman named Patricia Green, had been convinced to overlook irregularities in shipping manifests after Dale had made it clear what would happen to her grandson if she didn't cooperate. It was a perfect system. The freight trains came through twice a week. The containers were unloaded in the dead of night. The cargo was redistributed, and the trains moved on. No one in Ashford asked questions because asking questions was dangerous. But then Ethan Cross had arrived. He'd seemed harmless at first, just another tourist renting old Jim Morrison's cabin for a month. But Marcus, who made it his business to know everyone who came to town, had run a background check. Navy SEAL, 16 years of service, multiple commendations, expert in reconnaissance and tactical operations, and currently on terminal leave, which meant he was about to transition out of the military permanently. Marcus had brought this information to Dale immediately. "Why is a SEAL renting a cabin in the middle of nowhere?" Marcus had asked. At first, they'd thought it was just coincidence. Men like that often sought solitude after years of combat. But then, Ethan had started taking long walks. Through the freight yards, he'd stopped at the county clerk's office, asking innocent questions about property boundaries and historical freight routes. He'd struck up a conversation with old Harvey Peterson, who used to work the rail line before he retired, asking about how often trains came through and what they typically carried. Individually, none of these actions meant anything. Together, they formed a pattern. The pattern of a man conducting reconnaissance. He knows, Dale had told Marcus 3 days ago. Maybe he doesn't know everything, but he knows enough to be a problem. That's when they'd made the decision. Ethan Cross had to disappear, and it had to look like an accident. The freight train was scheduled to come through tomorrow night at 1:47 de la tarde. It was a cargo hauler moving at 45 miles per hour through the yards, not stopping until it reached Spokane. If someone were on the tracks tied down, unable to move, there would be nothing left but a tragic accident. No body to autopsy. No questions that couldn't be explained away. "We move at 2300 hours, Dale said, checking his watch. "Marcus, you and Ray handle the pickup. Tommy and Hank, you prep the site. I want the restraints military grade. He's trained to escape basic bindings. Use the steel cable ties from the warehouse, the ones rated for cargo containers." "And the dog?" Hank asked again, his discomfort evident. Dale's expression was cold. "The dog is a witness. Witnesses don't survive." He stood, dropping cash on the table for their coffee. "Get some rest. Tomorrow night, we close this chapter for good." The men filed out of the diner, one by one, disappearing into the cold Montana night. None of them noticed the small figure in the purple jacket watching from across the street, her dark eyes filled with fear and determination. Maja had heard enough. She knew where. She knew when. Now she just had to figure out what to do about it. The following evening came with a bitter cold that seemed to seep through clothing and settle in the bones. Ethan spent the day chopping wood, the physical labor, a welcome distraction from thoughts that had been circling his mind like vultures. Ranger stayed close, occasionally wandering off to investigate interesting scents, but always returning to check on his handler. As darkness fell, Ethan prepared a simple dinner: canned stew heated over the wood stove, bread that was starting to go stale, and black coffee strong enough to strip paint. He ate mechanically, his mind elsewhere. There was something about this town that felt off, though he couldn't put his finger on exactly what. It was a feeling he'd learned to trust in the field. The sensation that unseen eyes were watching, that danger lurked just beyond the visible horizon. He'd noticed things over the past week. Small things. The way conversations stopped when he entered the general store. The nervous glance from the county clerk when he'd asked about freight records. The truck that had driven past his cabin 3 times in one day, slowing each time as if the driver were memorizing details. Old instincts were waking up, and they were screaming that something was wrong. "Maybe I'm just paranoid, boy," he said to Ranger, who was lying by the fire, his head on his paws. "Too many years looking for threats. Maybe there's nothing here but a quiet town and my own damaged brain." Ranger's ears twitched, but he didn't look up. If the dog wasn't concerned, maybe Ethan shouldn't be either. At 10:30 de la tarde, Ethan decided to take Ranger for a final walk before bed. The night was clear and brutally cold. The stars overhead so bright they looked close enough to touch. He pulled on his heavy coat, wound a scarf around his neck, and clipped a lead to Ranger's collier, not because the dog needed it, but because it was habit. They walked down the narrow dirt road that led away from the cabin, their breath forming white clouds in the freezing air. The snow crunched under Ethan's boots, the sound abnormally loud in the stillness. They'd gone maybe a quarter mile when Ranger suddenly stopped. His entire body went rigid, his hackles rising in a slow wave from his shoulders to his tail. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not the curious whine from earlier, but the deep, threatening sound he made when he detected danger. "What is it?" Ethan whispered, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. The answer came in the form of headlights suddenly blazing to life, blinding and disorienting. A truck that had been sitting dark and hidden on the side of the road roared to life, its engine a violent snarl in the quiet night. Ethan's training kicked in immediately. He janked Ranger to the side, diving toward the tree line, but he wasn't fast enough. Two shapes emerged from the darkness behind him. He heard the whisper of movement, felt the rush of air, and then something hard and heavy crashed into the back of his skull. The world exploded into white light and pain. He went down hard, his face hitting the frozen ground. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Ranger's furious barking, the sound of snarling and men cursing. "Get the damn dog! Get!" A sharp crack echoed through the night. A tranquilizer gun. Ranger's barking turned into a yelp of surprise, then faded into silence. Ethan tried to push himself up, tried to fight, but his vision was swimming, and his limbs wouldn't obey. Hands grabbed him, rough and efficient. He felt the bite of zip ties around his wrists, then his ankles. He was lifted, his body limp and uncooperative, and thrown into the back of the truck. Through the fog of concussion, he saw Ranger lying motionless on the ground. For one horrible moment, he thought they'd killed him. But then he saw the slight rise and fall of the dog's chest. "Load the dog too," a voice commanded, cold. Familiar, though Ethan couldn't place it. "Boss wants them both on the tracks." The tracks. The words penetrated through the pain and disorientation. They were going to kill him. Make it look like an accident. Ethan tried to speak, to demand answers, but his mouth wouldn't form. Words. The concussion had scrambled his brain, and darkness was pulling at the edges of his consciousness, threatening to drag him under completely. He felt, rather than saw Ranger being lifted and thrown into the truck beside him. The dog's warm body pressed against his, both of them bound and helpless. The truck's engine roared to life, and they were moving, bouncing over rough terrain. Ethan forced his eyes open, fighting the darkness that wanted to claim him. He had to stay conscious, had to think, had to find a way out of this. But his training, all his years of experience, all the missions he'd survived, none of it mattered when you were ambushed, concussed, and bound. He was helpless. They were both helpless. The truck drove for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When it finally stopped, rough hands grabbed Ethan again, dragging him out into the freezing night. He was dropped onto something hard and cold metal. Railroad tracks. Through his blurred vision, he saw men moving with practiced efficiency. They weren't amateurs. They'd done this before, or at least planned it carefully. His wrists were being secured to the rail with something far stronger than zip ties, steel cable ties, the kind used to secure cargo containers, impossible to break. Beside him, Ranger was being similarly secured. The dog was starting to wake from the tranquilizer, his body twitching, a confused whine escaping his throat. "Please?" Ethan managed to croak, his voice barely functional. "The dog. Let the dog go. He's got nothing to do with." "Shut him up," the cold voice commanded. Something a rag, oily and foul-tasting, was shoved into Ethan's mouth. He gagged, his head spinning with pain and nausea. The men stepped back, admiring their work. Ethan forced his eyes to focus, trying to see their faces, to memorize anything that might help if, when he survived this. But they were careful. Ski masks, dark clothing, no identifying features visible. One of them the leader, Ethan thought, crouched down beside him. Even through the mask, Ethan could feel the man's eyes studying him. "You should have minded your own business." the man said softly. "This is a quiet town. We like it that way. People who ask too many questions? They don't stay quiet for long." He stood, brushing off his knees. "Train comes through in 23 minutes. By morning, you'll just be another tragic statistic." Another veteran who couldn't adjust to civilian life wandered onto the tracks. So sad, so preventably. The men walked back to their truck, their footsteps crunching on the frozen ground. The engine started, the headlights swept across the tracks one final time, and then they were gone, leaving Ethan and Ranger alone in the freezing darkness. Ethan's head was clearing slightly, enough for the full horror of the situation to sink in. He was tied to active train tracks. His wrists were secured with industrial-strength cable ties that required bolt cutters to remove. His ankles were similarly bound, and in less than 23 minutes, a freight train traveling at 45 miles per hour would come through this stretch of track. Beside him, Ranger had fully woken from the tranquilizer. The dog was struggling against his restraints, whining in confusion and fear, trying desperately to reach Ethan. Ethan worked his jaw, trying to dislodge the gag. After several agonizing seconds, he managed to push it out with his tongue. He spat, tasting oil and disgust. "Ranger?" A gasped, his voice horsey. "Ranger, easy, easy, boy." The dog's struggles slowed at the sound of his voice, but the whining intensified. Ranger understood that something was very, very wrong. Ethan tested his restraints. The cable ties didn't budge. He tried twisting his wrists, tried using his body weight to create leverage. But whoever had secured him knew what they were doing. These ties were designed to hold cargo weighing thousands of pounds. They weren't going to break. He looked around desperately. They were in a remote section of the freight yards, far from any buildings or roads. The nearest house was probably a mile away. Even if he screamed, no one would hear him over the winter wind. The cold was brutal. Without his coat, they'd stripped it off him, probably to make it harder to survive. Even if he somehow got free, the freezing temperature was already seeping into his bones. Hypothermia would set in soon. But that was the least of his problems. Hypothermia took hours. The train would arrive in minutes. Ethan closed his eyes, forcing himself to think tactically. There had to be a way out. There was always a way out. In 16 years as a SEAL, he'd escaped impossible situations. He'd been pinned down by enemy fire, trapped in flooding tunnels, caught in ambushes that should have been fatal. He'd survived because he refused to give up, because he always found the angle no one else could see. But this was different. He wasn't in enemy territory with a team ready to extract him. He was alone, bound, and helpless. Beside him, Ranger let out a long, mournful howl that echoed across the empty freight yards. It was the sound of a warrior calling for backup that wasn't coming. In the distance, barely audible over the wind, came the sound Ethan had been dreading. The low, mournful wail of a train whistle. Far away still, but getting closer. They had maybe 15 minutes left. Maya Reeves had never broken a rule in her life. She'd never stayed out past curfew, never talked back to her grandmother, never done anything that might be considered reckless or dangerous. After her parents died, she'd learned that the world was fragile and unpredictable, and the only way to survive was to follow the rules, keep your head down, and not draw attention to yourself. But tonight, she was breaking every rule she knew. She'd left her grandmother's apartment at 10:45 de la tarde, climbing out her bedroom window and shimmying down the fire escape, with her backpack on and her heart hammering, so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Her grandmother was working the night shift at the truck stop, so she wouldn't know Maya was gone until morning. By then, it would be too late to stop her. Maya had spent the entire day planning. She'd gone to the library after school and used the computer to research train schedules. The freight train from Seattle came through Ashford every Tuesday and Thursday at 1:47 de la tarde. It didn't stop. It moved at approximately 45 miles per hour through the yards, slowing only when it reached the switching station 3 miles outside of town. She'd also researched Navy SEALs. If the man they were planning to kill was a SEAL, then he was trained to survive impossible situations. But even the toughest soldier couldn't escape if he was tied down and didn't know the danger was coming. That's where Maya came in. She rode her bicycle through the dark streets of Ashford, the cold wind stinging her face and making her eyes water. She'd bundled up in every warm layer she owned thermal underwear, 2 sweaters, her purple jacket, and a knit cap pulled low over her ears. Her breath came in quick white puffs as she pedaled as fast as she could toward the freight yards. The yards were dark and forbidding at night, the old buildings casting long shadows that looked like crouching monsters. Maya had been scared of this place even in daylight. At night, it was the stuff of nightmares. But someone was going to die here tonight if she didn't do something. She ditched her bike behind an abandoned maintenance shed and pulled a flashlight from her backpack. She'd also brought a pair of wire cutters she'd stolen from the hardware store, well, borrowed. She'd return them, probably, if she survived this. The freight yards were massive, a maze of tracks and switches and old railway cars. Maya had no idea where exactly they would have put the man and his dog. She only knew it would be somewhere on the main line, the tracks where the freight train would pass through. She started walking, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Every sound made her jump: the creak of old metal, the whistle of wind through broken windows, the scurry of what she hoped were just mice. "Hello?" she called softly, her voice trembling. "Is anyone there?" No response. Just the wind and the distant sound of her own footsteps. She walked faster, parallel to the main tracks, her eyes scanning the darkness. She checked her phone. 1:34 de la tarde. 13 minutes until the train arrived. "Please," she whispered, to no one in particular, maybe to God, maybe to her parents, wherever they were. "Please, help me find them." And then she heard it. A sound that made her blood run cold and filled her with hope at the same time. A dog's howl, desperate and mournful, echoing across the empty yards. Maya broke into a run, following the sound. Her boots slipped on patches of ice, and she nearly fell twice, but she didn't slow down. The howling continued, growing louder, and then she saw them. 2 shapes on the tracks, barely visible in the darkness. She ran closer, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly, and then the light fell across them, and Maya gasped. A man, large and muscular, was tied to the railroad tracks. His wrists were secured to one rail with thick metal ties, his ankles to the other. He was wearing just jeans and a long-sleeved shirt, no coat, and he was shivering violently in the freezing cold. Beside him, a beautiful brown dog with alert ears and desperate eyes was similarly bound, cable ties securing him to the tracks. The dog was struggling, whining, trying to reach the man. The man's head turned toward her flashlight, his eyes squinting against the sudden brightness. His face was bruised, with dried blood crusted at his temple, but his gaze was sharp and focused. "Run," he croaked, his voice rough. "Kid, whoever you are, run. There's nothing you can do. Get away from here before—" "I know about the train," Maya interrupted, dropping to her knees beside him. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out the wire cutters. "I know they left you here. I heard them planning it." Ethan stared at her in shock. She was just a kid, maybe 12 years old, with a thin face and frightened eyes. But she'd come. Somehow, impossibly, she'd come. "The ties," he said urgently. "You can't cut them with those. They're steel cable, rated for—" "I know," Maya said, her voice cracking. "I know. But I had to try. I had to—" She attacked the cable tie on his right wrist with the wire cutters, squeezing with all her strength. The cutters bit into the metal but didn't break through. She tried again, tears streaming down her face now, her breath coming in panicked sobs. "It's not working," she cried. "Why isn't it working?" "Hey," Ethan said, his voice suddenly calm, dropping into the command tone he'd used to steady frightened soldiers under fire. "Look at me. What's your name?" "Maya," she whispered. "Maya, listen to me very carefully. How long until the train gets here?" She checked her phone with trembling hands. 11 minutes. Okay. Okay. We have time. Maya, I need you to listen. "There's a junction box about 50 yards that way." He nodded with his head toward the south. "It controls the track switches. If you can throw the switch, you can divert the train to a different track. Do you understand?" I don't know how to." "Red lever on the left side of the box. You pull it down hard. It'll be stiff, but you can do it. Can you do that for me, Maya?" She was already standing, preparing to run, when she hesitated. "What about you? And your dog? You divert that train, and we'll figure out the rest. Go, now." Maya ran. Ethan watched her flashlight beam bouncing through the darkness, getting smaller as she sprinted toward the junction box. Beside him, Ranger had quieted, seeming to sense that hope had arrived in an unexpected package. "Smart kid," Ethan murmured. "If we survive this, I'm buying her a lifetime supply of whatever kids like these days." His mind was racing. If Maya could divert the train, they'd have time. Not much, but some. Enough for him to figure out their next move. The cable ties wouldn't break, but maybe he could work them loose from the track itself. The rails were old, the spikes that held them in place potentially rusted. He began working his bound wrists back and forth, testing the give in the metal. It was minimal, but it was something. In the distance, the train whistle sounded again. Closer now. Much closer. "Come on, Maya," Ethan whispered. "You can do this." Maya reached the junction box and nearly sobbed with relief when she saw it. It was exactly where the seal had said it would be, a large metal box with a lever on the left side, painted red, and marked with faded warnings about authorized personnel only. She grabbed the lever with both hands and pulled. Nothing happened. She tried again, throwing all her weight into it, her boots slipping on the icy ground. The lever didn't budge. It was frozen in place, either from rust or ice or both. "No, no, no," she cried, pulling again. Her hands were freezing, her gloves not thick enough to protect against the bitter cold of the metal. "Please, please move." She could hear the train now. Not just the whistle, but the rumble of it, the deep bass vibration that traveled through the ground and into her bones. It was getting closer. 8 minutes, maybe less. Maya looked around desperately and spotted a length of rusted pipe lying nearby, probably discarded from some old maintenance project. She grabbed it, wedged it under the lever to create additional leverage, and pulled again. This time, she felt movement. Just a fraction of an inch, but it moved. "Yes," she gasped. She adjusted her grip, planted her feet, and pulled with everything she had. Her muscles screamed in protest, her hands were going numb, but she didn't let go. The lever groaned, resisting, and then suddenly gave way with a metallic shriek that echoed across the yards. It slammed down into the engaged position, and Maya heard the deep chunk of heavy machinery activating somewhere beneath the ground. The track switch was thrown. Maya dropped the pipe and ran back toward where she'd left the seal and his dog, her lungs burning from the cold air and exertion. She could see the train now, its headlight a bright white star, cutting through the darkness, growing larger with every passing second. She reached them, falling to her knees beside the man. "I did it," she gasped. "The switch, I threw it." Ethan's face, which had been tight with controlled fear, relaxed slightly. "You did good, kid. Real good. Now get away from the tracks. Get behind that railway car over there and stay down." "But what about Maya? Listen to me. If that switch didn't engage properly, or if there's any chance that train doesn't divert, I need you safe. Go. Now." That's an order. The command in his voice was impossible to disobey. Maya scrambled backward, running toward an old boxcar about 30 yards from the tracks. She ducked behind it, peering around the edge, her heart in her throat. The train was close now, so close she could see the individual details of the engine, could read the numbers on its side. It was massive, a wall of steel and unstoppable momentum. The headlight swept across the tracks where Ethan and Ranger lay bound and helpless. And then, at the last possible second, the train shifted. The wheels hit the switch junction, and the entire massive freight hauler moved to the diverted track, missing Ethan and Ranger by maybe 15 feet. The noise was deafening, the screech of metal on metal, the rumble of dozens of cars passing at high speed, the blast of air and debris they kicked up. It lasted for what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than a minute. And then the train was past, its taillights disappearing into the darkness, leaving only the smell of diesel and the settling dust. Maya ran back to the tracks. Ethan was laughing, actually laughing, the sound edged with relief and disbelief. "Kid," he said, "you just saved our lives. But we're not out of this yet. Those cable ties are still on, and the men who put us here are going to figure out pretty quick that their plan failed. We need to get free, and we need to move fast." Maya knelt beside him, looking at the heavy cable ties that still bound him to the tracks. "How? I can't cut these." "No," Ethan agreed. "But you can find help. Is there anyone in this town you trust? Anyone who isn't part of whatever corruption is running this place?" Maya thought hard, her mind racing through the adults she knew in Ashford. Most of them either worked for Dale Pritchard's freight company or were too scared to stand up to him. But then she remembered someone. "Doc Martinez," she said. "He runs the urgent care clinic on Jefferson Street. He's not from here originally. He moved here 5 years ago. He doesn't like Mr. Pritchard. I heard him arguing with him once about something at the town council meeting. Can you get to him?" "Yes." "Then go. Tell him exactly what happened. Tell him there's a Navy SEAL and his military working dog tied to the railroad tracks in the eastern section of the freight yards, and we need bolt cutters. Can you remember that? Navy SEAL, military working dog, eastern freight yards, bolt cutters," Maya repeated. "I can remember. Good girl. Go fast. Stay in the light. And Maya?" She paused, looking back at him. "Thank you. You're the bravest person I've ever met." Maya's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded and ran into the darkness, her flashlight beam bouncing ahead of her as she raced toward Jefferson Street. Ethan watched her go, then looked over at Ranger, who was watching him with those intelligent amber eyes. "Hell of a kid," Ethan murmured. "Reminds me of some of the young recruits we used to get. The ones who didn't know they couldn't do the impossible, so they just went ahead and did it anyway." Ranger whined softly in agreement. Now they just had to hope that Maya's trust wasn't misplaced, and that Doc Martinez was the kind of man who would believe an impossible story from a 12-year-old girl and act on it. Because in about 20 minutes, when Dale Pritchard and his crew realized the train hadn't finished the job, they'd be coming back to clean up their mistake personally. And this time, they wouldn't leave anything to chance. CTA Numeraldos. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more incredible true stories of courage and loyalty. Dr. Javier Martinez was finishing his evening paperwork when the frantic pounding on the clinic's door nearly made him drop his coffee. He looked up at the clock, 1:58 de la tarde. The urgent care clinic had closed at 9, and he'd only stayed late to catch up on insurance forms that had been piling up. The pounding came again, more desperate this time, accompanied by a child's voice crying, "Please, please, someone help." Javier was on his feet immediately, crossing the small waiting room in 3 strides. He unlocked the door and pulled it open to find a young girl. He recognized her as Maya Reeves, the quiet kid who lived with her grandmother on Oak Street, standing on his doorstep. She was gasping for breath, her face red from exertion and cold, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Maya? What's wrong? Are you hurt?" He did a quick visual assessment, looking for injuries. "Not me," she gasped, grabbing his arm with surprising strength. "Dr. Martinez, please, you have to believe me. There's a man and his dog there tied to the railroad tracks in the freight yards. The train already came, but I diverted it. But they're still there, and the bad men are going to come back and—" "Slow down," Javier said, crouching to her level. "Take a breath. Start from the beginning." Maya gulped air and forced herself to slow down. 2 days ago, I heard men in the freight yards talking about killing someone. They said they were going to put him on the tracks to make it look like an accident. Tonight, They did it. They tied a Navy SEAL and his military working dog to the tracks. I found them, and I diverted the train, but they're still tied up. He needs bolt cutters, big ones, for cable ties. Javier stared at her, his mind trying to process what she was saying. It sounded insane. It sounded like something out of a movie. But Maya Reeves wasn't a kid who made things up. She was serious and responsible, the kind of child teachers loved because she always did her homework and never caused trouble. And the terror in her eyes was real. "Show me," he said, making a decision. He grabbed his medical bag from behind the reception desk and his heavy coat from the hook by the door. He also grabbed his phone and "Deled 900, 11 as he ushered Maya toward his truck in the parking lot. 911, what's your emergency?" "This is Dr. Martinez at the urgent care clinic on Jefferson. I need police and emergency services at the eastern section of the Ashford freight yards immediately. There's a report of 2 individuals restrained on the railroad tracks." There was a pause. "Sir, can you repeat that?" "Railroad tracks. Eastern freight yards. 2 people tied down. This is a medical emergency." Another pause, longer this time. "Sir, we'll dispatch a unit, but it may take some time. Our officers are currently responding to a situation on the west side of town. This can't wait," Javier said, his voice hard. He ended the call and looked at Maya, who had climbed into the passenger seat of his truck. "Which way?" "Turn left out of the parking lot, then take the service road past the old mill." Javier drove fast, his truck bouncing over potholes and rough patches where the pavement had crumbled. Beside him, Maya was giving directions, her voice steadier, now that an adult had believed her and was taking action. They reached the freight yards, and Maya directed him to park behind the same maintenance shed where she'd left her bicycle. "We have to walk from here," she said. "Your truck is too loud, if the bad men are still around." "Good thinking," Javier said. He opened his truck's toolbox and found a large pair of bolt cutters he used for occasional ranch work at a friend's property. "Lead the way. But Maya, if we encounter anyone dangerous, you run. Understand? You run and you don't look back." She nodded, though her expression said she had no intention of running if it came to that. They moved through the dark freight yards, Maya's flashlight guiding them. The cold was brutal, and Javier found himself wondering how long the man and dog had been exposed to these temperatures. Hypothermia could kill in less than an hour, in weather like this. "There," Maya whispered, pointing ahead. Javier saw them 2 shapes on the tracks, barely moving. He broke into a run, his medical training taking over. The man was in bad shape. His lips were blue, his skin pale, and he was shivering so violently it looked like convulsions. The dog beside him was in better condition but clearly distressed, whining and struggling weakly against his restraints. "I'm Dr. Martinez," Javier said, kneeling beside the man. "I'm going to get you free. Maya, shine the light here." He positioned the bolt cutters on the cable tie securing the man's right wrist and squeezed with all his strength. The hardened steel blades bit into the industrial cable tie, and after several seconds of intense pressure, it snapped. The man's arm dropped, and he let out a groan of relief mixed with pain. His shoulder had been wrenched from hours in that position. Javier worked quickly, cutting through the remaining ties, wrists, ankles, and then moving to the dog. The Malinois watched him with alert eyes, growling softly but not aggressively, as if he understood that this human was helping. "Easy, boy," Javier murmured. "I'm a friend. We're getting you out." The final tie snapped, and the dog immediately scrambled to his feet, or tried to. His legs were stiff from cold and immobility, and he nearly collapsed. The man, despite his own condition, reached out and steadied his partner. "Ranger," the man gasped. "Easy. We're okay. We're okay, boy." "We need to get you both to the clinic," Javier said. "You're severely hypothermic. Can you walk?" "Have to," the man said. His teeth were chattering so hard he could barely speak. "They'll come back. They'll check to make sure the job's done." "Who will come back?" "The men who did this. They think I know too much about their operation. Freight yard. smuggling, military weapons, human trafficking. His words were slurred, the cold and concussion making it hard to speak clearly. Can't trust local police. Sheriffs compromised. Javier felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. If the sheriff was involved, then calling 900 once had been a mistake. He just alerted the very people who'd tried to kill this man. "Can you stand?" he asked. With Javier's help, the man got to his feet. He was large easily, 6'1" and 200 pounds of muscle, but he was weak from cold and injury. Ranger pressed against his leg, providing support. "Maya," Javier said, "help me get him to the truck. We need to move fast." They started back toward the maintenance shed, moving as quickly as the man's condition allowed. They'd made it maybe 50 yards when they heard the sound that made Javier's blood run cold. Engines. Multiple vehicles, moving fast, coming toward the freight yards. "They're here," the man said, his voice gaining strength through sheer force of will. "They know the train didn't finish the job. They're coming to do it personally." "The truck's another 100 yards," Javier said. "Won't make it," the man replied. His eyes, even clouded with cold and pain, were sharp and tactical. "3 of us, 1 injured. They'll catch us in the open. Need to hide." Need to. He looked around, his SEAL training cutting through the hypothermia. That building. The old locomotive repair shed. Defensible position. Multiple exits. He was right. They couldn't outrun vehicles, especially not with him barely able to walk. They needed to hide and hope the pursuers would assume they'd already escaped. "This way," Javier said, changing direction. Maya followed without question, her small hand clutching the back of his coat. They reached the old repair shed just as headlights swept across the far end of the freight yards. The building was massive, 2 stories tall with broken windows and a roof that had partially collapsed. They slipped inside through a gap in the wall, and the man Ethan, Javier remembered Maya, saying immediately began assessing their surroundings with the cold efficiency of a soldier. "Upper level," he said, pointing to a rusted metal staircase. "High ground. Multiple sight lines. If they search, they'll clear the ground floor first." They climbed, the stairs groaning ominously under their weight. The upper level was a catwalk that ran along the perimeter of the building, giving views of both the interior and, through the broken windows, the freight yards beyond. From their vantage point, they watched as 3 trucks pulled up to where they'd been tied down. Men got out. Javier counted 6 of them, and the scene below was illuminated by their headlights and flashlights. "Where are they?" a voice shouted, carrying clearly in the cold air. "The tracks are empty. The ties have been cut. Search the area," another voice commanded. Javier recognized it, Dale Pritchard, the freight yard foreman. He'd always thought there was something cold about the man. They can't have gone far. The SEAL was hypothermic, and that dog was drugged. "Find them." The men spread out, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. 2 of them started moving toward the repair shed. Beside Javier, Ethan had gone completely still. Even Ranger seemed to understand the need for absolute silence. The dog lay flat, his ears forward, watching the men below. Maya was pressed against Javier's side, trembling not from cold, but from fear. He put a protective arm around her shoulders. The 2 men entered the repair shed below them. Javier could hear their footsteps, could hear them talking in low voices. "Check behind those old machines. This place is a death trap. The whole roof could come down. Just do it. Boss wants them found." The footsteps moved deeper into the building, searching methodically. Javier held his breath, painfully aware that the old catwalk they were standing on could give them away with a single creak. One of the men stopped directly below them, his flashlight beam sweeping across the ground floor. If he looked up, if he thought to check the upper level. Ranger's body tensed. Javier could feel it happening. The dog was going to alert, going to protect his handler, and these new pack members from the threat below. A single bark would give away their position. Ethan's hand moved, making a gesture that Javier didn't recognize, but that Ranger clearly did. The dog relaxed instantly, though his eyes never left the men below. After what felt like an eternity, The two searchers gave up. Nothing here. Just old junk. Yeah, let's check the other buildings. They left, and Javier released a breath. He hadn't realized he'd been holding. Below, in the freight yards, Dale Pritchard was losing his temper. They couldn't have just vanished. Someone helped them. Someone saw what we did and helped them escape. "What do we do, boss?" one of his men asked. There was a long pause. When Pritchard spoke again, his voice was cold and calculated. "We clean up the evidence and we disappear the problem. That seal has no proof. It's his word against ours, and we own the sheriff. We go back to business as usual and wait. He'll surface eventually, and when he does, we'll be ready." The men got back into their trucks and drove away, leaving the freight yards dark and silent once more. For several minutes, none of them moved. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice still rough but stronger than before. "They're gone. For now. But he's right about one thing: I don't have proof. Nothing that would stand up in court. It's just my word against theirs, and I'm an outsider here." "That's where you're wrong," Javier said quietly. "Maya heard them planning this 2 days ago. She's a witness. I'm a witness to the fact that you were tied to those tracks. And there are cable tie remnants and evidence all over that scene. That's not nothing. In a town where the sheriff is compromised?" Ethan shook his head. "We need outside help, federal authorities. Someone who can't be bought or intimidated." "I know someone," Javier said. "My brother-in-law works for the FBI field office in Helena. He's clean, and he's good at his job. I can call him." "Do it," Ethan said. "But we need to get somewhere safe first. Those men will be watching the roads, watching the clinic, watching anywhere they think we might go." "I have a place," Javier said. "My family owns a cabin about 15 miles outside town. It's off the grid, solar power, and a well. We use it for hunting season. Nobody knows about it except close family." "Then, that's where we go," Ethan said. He looked at Maya, who was watching him with wide, exhausted eyes. "Kid, you saved my life. Ranger's life. That's a debt I can never repay. But now, I need you to do one more thing for us." "What?" Maya asked. "We need your grandmother to know you're safe, but we can't tell her where we are. Not yet. Not until we know who we can trust." "Do you have a way to contact her without giving away our location?" Maya thought for a moment, then nodded. "I can text her from Dr. Martinez's phone. Just tell her I'm safe, and I'll explain everything soon." "Good girl," Ethan said. Then, for the first time since they'd found him, he smiled. "You know what, Maya? When I was your age, I wanted to be a superhero. Turned out the real heroes don't wear capes. They wear purple jackets and carry wire cutters. They can't quite use, but they show up anyway. Despite everything, the fear, the cold, the exhaustion." Maya smiled back. The cabin was exactly as Javier had described it: isolated, comfortable, and completely off the grid. It sat in a clearing, surrounded by dense pine forest, with a narrow access road that was barely visible from the main highway. By the time they arrived, it was nearly 2 de la mañana, and all three of them were running on pure adrenaline. Javier got a fire going in the stone fireplace, while Ethan collapsed onto the worn leather couch, his body finally giving in to the abuse it had endured. Ranger lay on the floor beside him, his head resting on Ethan's boot in a gesture that was both protective and comforting. Maya sat in an armchair, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, her eyes struggling to stay open. Javier had already sent the text to her grandmother from his phone. "This is Dr. Martinez. Maya is safe with me. There was an emergency situation that she'll explain when it's safe to do so. Please don't contact the sheriff or police. I'll have her call you in the morning. Trust me. She's a hero." The response had come quickly, full of confusion and worry, but also trust. Javier had delivered 3 of Mrs. Reeves's grandchildren over the years. She knew he wouldn't lie about Maya's safety. Now, with the immediate danger past, they had time to think, to plan, and to finally understand what they'd stumbled into. "Tell me everything," Javier said, sitting across from Ethan with a medical kit open beside him. "Start from the beginning. Ethan winced as Javier began cleaning the wound on his head, checking for signs of serious concussion. "My name is Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cross, Navy SEALs. I'm on terminal leave transitioning out of the service after 16 years. I came to Ashford because it was quiet and isolated. I wanted peace." "You chose poorly," Javier said dryly. "Apparently." Ethan's expression was grim. "About a week ago, I started noticing things. Small things. Conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. People watching me. I've been trained to spot surveillance. And this town was running surveillance on me. Why? At first, I thought I was paranoid. Combat does that. Sometimes you see threats that aren't there. But then I started paying attention. Really paying attention." He paused, while Javier applied a butterfly bandage to his temple. "The freight trains come through twice a week. I watch them. The manifests posted at the freight office don't match what's actually being loaded and unloaded. I saw it with my own eyes." "You saw what, exactly?" Javier asked. "Shipping containers marked as lumber and manufacturing supplies being opened at 2 in the morning by men with assault rifles. Crate is being transferred to unmarked trucks. The kind of operational security you use when you're moving something illegal." Javier sat back, his expression troubled. "What do you think they're moving?" "Weapons. Definitely. I saw enough to recognize the crate configurations. Probably stolen from military depots. It happens more than the DoD likes to admit. Beyond that," he shrugged. "Could be drugs. Could be people. With an operation this organized, it's probably all of the above. And they figured out you were watching them. Must have. Someone saw me at the county clerk's office asking about freight manifests and property records. Someone else saw me talking to a retired rail worker about shipping schedules. Individually, those actions mean nothing. Together, they paint a picture of someone conducting reconnaissance." Ethan looked at Ranger, who was sleeping now, his breathing deep and even. "They decided to eliminate the problem before it became bigger. Make it look like an accident. Another veteran who couldn't adjust to civilian life." The bitterness in his voice was palpable. Maya, who had been quietly listening, spoke up for the first time. "Mr. Pritchard runs everything. The freight company, the town council, even the volunteer fire department. My grandmother says he's like the unofficial mayor. Whatever he says, people do." "Dale Pritchard," Ethan confirmed. "He's the one who gave the order." I heard his voice. "And he mentioned the sheriff being in his pocket." Javier's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and smiled grimly. "My brother-in-law. He's calling back," he answered on speaker. "Daniel? Javi? What the hell is going on? You text me at 2 in the morning about federal crimes in some backwater Montana town?" The voice was deep, tinged with concern, but also sharp with professional interest. "I need you to listen, and I need you to believe me," Javier said. "I've got a Navy SEAL sitting in front of me who was tied to railroad tracks tonight as part of a murder attempt. He has intelligence about a major smuggling operation running through Ashford, and the local sheriff is compromised." There was a pause. "Put him on." Javier handed the phone to Ethan, who sat up straighter despite his exhaustion. "Special Agent Reeves, this is Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cross, NSAW Group 2, serial number 69472-815. I'm reporting a credible threat involving trafficking of military weapons, possible human trafficking, and corruption of local law enforcement." The professional military cadence in Ethan's voice clearly changed the tone of the conversation. "Commander Cross, I'm going to need you to give me everything you have, every detail. But first, I need to verify your identity." For the next 10 minutes, Ethan provided information that only someone with his military background would know: unit deployments, classified operation code names, the names of his commanding officers. Daniel Reeves, on the other end of the line, was clearly running checks in real time. Finally, the FBI agent spoke again, and his voice was no longer skeptical. "Commander, I've verified your identity and service record. I'm also seeing some flags in our system. There's been a bolo out for you for the last 3 hours." Sheriff Warren Hodge in Ashford reported you as a missing person, possibly a danger to yourself due to PTSD. They're painting you as mentally unstable." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's the cover story. If I turn up dead, they'll say I wandered onto the tracks myself." "Not anymore, they won't," Daniel said, steel in his voice. "I'm mobilizing a team right now." "Where are you?" "Safe house. About 15 miles outside Ashford. But before you come in, I need to tell you something important. There's a 12-year-old girl named Maya Reeves." He paused. "Reeves? Any relation?" "That's my niece," Daniel said, his voice suddenly sharp with concern. "What about Maya?" "She's a hero. She's the one who found me and my dog on those tracks. She diverted the train, saved our lives, and got help. Without her, your brother-in-law, and I wouldn't be having this conversation." There was a long silence on the other end. When Daniel spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "Is she safe? Can I talk to her?" Javier Hentley woke Maya, who had finally dozed off in her chair. "Maya, honey, it's your Uncle Daniel. He wants to talk to you." Maya took the phone with sleepy confusion. "Uncle Danny?" "Maya, sweetheart. Are you okay? Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," she said, tears suddenly streaming down her face as the weight of the night finally crashed down on her. "I was so scared, Uncle Danny. They were going to die, and nobody would believe me, and I didn't know what to do." "You did exactly the right thing," Daniel said, his voice firm and full of pride. "You were brave and smart, and you saved lives. I'm so proud of you. Do you understand?" "I am so incredibly proud of you." Maya nodded, though he couldn't see her, trying too hard to speak. "I'm coming, sweetheart. I'm bringing a team, and we're going to make sure the bad men can't hurt anyone anymore. Can you put Dr. Martinez back on?" She handed the phone back to Javier, who returned to his conversation with his brother-in-law. "Javi, I need you to sit tight," Daniel said. "Don't contact anyone in Ashford. Don't use your regular phones. I'm sending a protection detail to your location within 2 hours, and I'll be there by sunrise with a full tactical team. We're going to take this operation down." "What do you need from us?" Javier asked. "Everything Commander Cross knows. Every detail he observed, every name he heard, every piece of evidence he can provide. I want statements from all 3 of you. And then, I want you to stay safe and let us do our job." After the call ended, Ethan looked at Javier and Maya with an expression that was part gratitude, part determination. "They're coming," he said. "But Pritchard is smart. By sunrise, he'll know I'm alive and that I've contacted authorities. He'll start destroying evidence, disappearing witnesses, maybe even running. We can't let that happen." "What are you suggesting?" Javier asked carefully. "We keep them busy," Ethan said. "We make them think they still have a chance to clean up their mess. We give them a target they can't resist." "You," Javier said. "You're talking about using yourself as bait, not just me." Ethan looked down at Ranger, who had woken at the change in his handler's tone. "We've done this before, haven't we, boy? We're pretty good at being bait." "That's insane," Javier protested. "You're hypothermic, concussed, and exhausted. You can barely stand." "I've operated in worse condition," Ethan said, which was true, but not particularly comforting. "Besides, I'm not suggesting we take them on alone. I'm suggesting we keep them focused on me while Agent Reeves and his team move into position. We be the distraction." "How?" Ethan's smile was cold and tactical. "We let them know exactly where I am. We make them think they have one more chance to finish the job. And when they come for me, they'll walk straight into a federal trap." It was risky. It was dangerous. It was the kind of plan that could go wrong in 100 different ways. But looking at the exhausted 12-year-old girl who had risked everything to save a stranger, and the dedicated doctor who had believed her impossible story, Ethan knew that some things were worth the risk. They'd come to kill him because he'd asked questions, because he'd seen too much, because he represented a threat to their profitable, evil enterprise. Now he was going to make sure they regretted ever hearing his name. By 4 de la mañana, Ethan had laid out the plan. It was simple, which in military terms meant it had the best chance of actually working. "Pritchard thinks I'm running," Ethan explained, using Javier's laptop to map out the terrain around the cabin. "He thinks I'm scared, injured, and trying to hide. That's what he expects. So we give him exactly what he expects, but with a twist." He pointed to the map. "This cabin is defensible. Good sight lines, limited approaches, only one access road. But that's also a weakness. If they trap us here, we have nowhere to run. So we don't wait for them to trap us. We lure them here deliberately, with the FBI ready to close the trap." "How do you lure them?" Javier asked. "Simple. We make a mistake. A careless, desperate mistake that tells them exactly where we are." Ethan pulled up the Sheriff's Department website on the laptop. "We call 911. We report that I'm here, that I'm injured, and that I need immediate medical assistance. The call goes through the county dispatch, which means Sheriff Hodge hears it immediately," Javier finished. And he tells Pritchard, "Exactly. They'll think I'm stupid, that I panicked and called for help without realizing they control the emergency services. They'll mobilize fast, trying to get here before any real authorities arrive. But the FBI will already be in position," Javier said, understanding dawning. "You're using their own corruption against them." "It's what I do," Ethan said simply. Maya, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "What about me and Dr. Martinez? Where do we go?" "You two are getting out of here before anything happens," Ethan said firmly. "Agent Reeves is sending a protection detail. They'll escort you to Helena, put you in a safe house, and keep you under guard until this is over." "No," Maya said, her voice surprisingly strong for someone so small. Both men looked at her in surprise. "No?" Ethan repeated. "I'm not leaving," Maya said, her chin set stubbornly. "I found you. I saved you. I'm part of this now. If I run away, it's like saying, I didn't have the right to help in the first place." "Maya," Javier said gently, "this is going to be dangerous. There's going to be armed men." "No," Maya interrupted. "I heard them planning to kill someone. I've already been in danger. Running away now won't make me safer. It'll just make me a different kind of target. If Mr. Pritchard knows I helped you escape, he'll come after me eventually. The only way I'm really safe is if he's in jail." Ethan studied the young girl with new respect. She wasn't speaking from bravado or childish stubbornness. She was speaking from a clear-eyed understanding of the situation, the kind of tactical thinking he'd seen in experienced soldiers. "She's right," he said to Javier. "If Pritchard even suspects she's a witness, she'll be at risk. The only permanent solution is to end this operation completely." "So what do you suggest?" Javier asked, clearly unhappy with the situation, but recognizing the truth in their words. "She stays here, but nowhere near the action. There's a root cellar under the cabin's kitchen, right? I saw the trapdoor." "Yes," Javier confirmed. "Built during Prohibition, reinforced during the Cold War. It's basically a bunker. Perfect. Maya goes in the cellar with Ranger. The dog will protect her with his life, and that cellar can withstand pretty much anything short of explosives. She'll be safer there than anywhere else." Ranger, hearing his name, lifted his head. Ethan reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears. "You've got a new mission, boy. Guard duty. Protect the kid. Can you do that for me?" Ranger's tail thumped once against the floor. In the language they'd developed over years of partnership, that was an affirmative. "What about me?" Javier asked. "I'm not military, but I can shoot. My father taught me to hunt when I was a kid." "You're my medic," Ethan said. "If this goes south, if I get hit, you're the one who keeps me alive until the cavalry arrives." "That's not a secondary role, Doc. That's mission critical," Javier nodded, accepting the assignment. By 5 de la mañana, the FBI protection detail arrived 2 agents in an unmarked SUV who took up positions in the woods surrounding the cabin. They were the advance guard, Confirmation that Agent Daniel Reeves was taking this threat seriously. At 5:30 de la mañana, Ethan made the call. 911. What's your emergency? My name is Ethan Cross, he said, making his voice sound weak and frightened. It wasn't hard. His body was still recovering from hypothermia. I'm at a cabin about 15 miles east of Ashford. I need medical help. I was attacked. I think they tried to kill me. Sir, what's your exact location? Ethan gave them the address, then added, Please hurry. I think they're coming back. I think they're going to try again. Sir, stay on the line. We're dispatching deputies to your location. How long? Approximately 20 minutes. Can you tell me the nature of your injuries? Head wound. Hypothermia. I can't think straight. He let his voice trail off, as if he were fading. Sir, stay with me. Ethan ended the call. Now we wait, he said to Javier. Pritchard will hear about this within minutes. He'll mobilize his crew. They'll beat the deputies here because they don't have to follow the speed limit or call for backup. They'll come in hard and fast, expecting to find one injured man and his dog. Instead, they'll find what? Javier asked. Ethan's smile was cold and dangerous. For the first time since being tied to those tracks, he looked less like a victim and more like what he actually was. A highly trained, special operations soldier who'd just been given a mission. They'll find out why you don't poke the bear, he said quietly, and why you definitely don't try to kill a Navy SEAL's dog. In the root cellar below the kitchen, Maya sat with her arms wrapped around Ranger's neck, feeling the steady warmth of the dog's body against hers. She could hear movement above Ethan and Dr. Martinez, preparing for what was coming. She wasn't scared anymore. Or rather, she was scared, but it was a different kind of fear. Not the helpless terror of watching a train bear down on two bound figures. This was the fear of someone who'd made a choice, who'd decided to stand up instead of run, and who was prepared to face the consequences. We're going to be okay, she whispered to Ranger. Your person is strong, and Uncle Danny is coming, and we're going to be okay. Ranger licked her face once, a gesture of comfort and solidarity. Above them, the trap was set. Now they just had to wait for the prey to walk into it. The sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky when Ethan heard the engines. Multiple vehicles, moving fast, coming up the access road without any attempt at stealth. They wanted him to hear them coming. They wanted him scared. 3 trucks, Ethan said, watching through the cabin window from a concealed position. Counting 6, no, 7 men, all armed. They're not even trying to hide it. He was wearing borrowed clothes from Javier's hunting gear thermal layers and a heavy canvas jacket. His head still throbbed from the concussion, and his body ached from the hypothermia, but his hands were steady, and his mind was clear. This was familiar territory. This was what he'd trained for. Where's the FBI? Javier asked from his position near the back door. In position, Ethan confirmed, checking his phone. Agent Reeves had sent a text 3 minutes ago. Hold position. Do not engage. Let them commit. The trucks came to a stop about 50 yards from the cabin, parking in a loose semicircle that blocked the access road. Dale Pritchard got out of the lead vehicle, and even from this distance, Ethan could see the man's cold confidence. Pritchard was carrying a hunting rifle, legal, defensible, the weapon of someone who might legitimately be responding to a report of a dangerous individual. But the men with him weren't bothering with that pretense. They carried AR-15 and tactical shotguns, dressed in body armor and moving with the coordination of people who'd worked together before. Not their first time, Ethan murmured. They've done this before. Probably multiple times. We're not the first problem they've made disappear. Ethan Cross, Pritchard's voice carried clearly in the cold morning air. I know you're in there. I know you're hurt. We can help you. We're here to help. The lie was so blatant, it would have been funny if it weren't so dangerous. We just want to talk, Pritchard continued. Clear up this misunderstanding. No one needs to get hurt. Ethan stayed silent. The longer he waited, the more likely they were to make a mistake. "We can do this the easy way, or we can do it the hard way," Pritchard said, his voice losing its false friendliness. "But either way, this ends today." He made a gesture, and his men began to advance, spreading out to surround the cabin. That's when Agent Daniel Reeves's voice cut through the air, amplified by a bullhorn. "FBI! Everyone on the ground! Now, drop your weapons and get on the ground!" The reaction was instant chaos. Pritchard spun, searching for the source of the voice. His men scattered, looking for cover. And in that moment of confusion, Ethan saw the truth. They were going to fight. They weren't going to surrender. They'd rather risk a shootout than face what would come out if they were arrested. "Javier, down!" Ethan shouted, dropping below the window as the first shot was fired. It came from one of Pritchard's men, a panic shot aimed at shadows in the trees. It was the match that lit the powder keg. The FBI agents, who had been surrounding the clearing in concealment, had no choice but to return fire. The dawn erupted with the sound of gunfire, muzzle flashes visible in the dim light, and men shouting commands and warnings. Ethan crawled to the back door, keeping low. Javier was already there, his face pale but steady. "Stay down," Ethan ordered. "The cabin walls are solid logs. As long as you're below the windows, you're protected. What about you?" "I'm going to even the odds," Ethan said. He'd spotted something during his earlier reconnaissance of the cabin, a hunting rifle in Javier's gun cabinet, a 30 hasta 06 with a scope. Not his preferred weapon, but it would do. He grabbed the rifle, checked that it was loaded, and moved to a second-floor window that gave him a clear view of the clearing. From this elevated position, he could see the entire tactical situation. The FBI had numbers and training, but Pritchard's men had the advantage of desperation. They knew capture meant life in prison. They were fighting like cornered animals. One of them, Marcus Lowe, the former military police officer, was trying to flank the FBI position, moving through the trees with professional competence. He'd get behind the federal agents, and people would die. Ethan sighted through the scope, his breathing automatically slowing, his finger finding the familiar curve of the trigger. It had been years since he'd done any precision shooting in an operational environment, but the skills were still there, ingrained at a level deeper than conscious thought. He didn't aim to kill. That wasn't his place here. But he could prevent Marcus from completing his flanking maneuver. Ace squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. 50 yards away, Marcus dove for cover as the bullet impacted the tree 6 inches from his head. Ethan worked the bolt, chambering another round. He fired again, and this time Marcus's rifle went spinning from his hands, hit by the bullet. "FBI, cease fire." Agent Reeves's voice boomed again. "You are surrounded. This is your last warning." The message was finally getting through. With Marcus neutralized and the FBI closing in from multiple directions, Pritchard's men began to realize their situation was hopeless. One by one, weapons were thrown down, hands raised in surrender. Only Pritchard himself refused to give up. He'd made it back to his truck and was trying to start the engine, apparently planning to ram through the FBI line and escape. Ethan aimed carefully and fired once more. The truck's front tire exploded, the vehicle lurching to a stop. FBI agents swarmed the truck, dragging Pritchard out and forcing him to the ground. Within minutes, all 7 men were in handcuffs, lying face down in the dirt as agents secured them. Agent Daniel Reeves, a tall black man in his 40s with sharp eyes and an air of absolute authority, approached the cabin cautiously. "Commander Cross? Dr. Martinez? It's safe to come out." Ethan lowered the rifle and headed downstairs, Javier right behind him. They emerged from the cabin into the cold morning air, now thick with the smell of gunpowder and pine. Daniel's eyes found Ethan immediately. "Commander Cross? That's me," Ethan confirmed. "And before you ask, every shot I fired was defensive and aimed to disable, not kill. I prevented one of your suspects from flanking your agents, and I disabled his vehicle to prevent escape." "You're welcome." A smile tugged at Daniel's mouth. "We'll need your statement, but yeah, we noticed. Thank you." His expression became more serious. "Where's Maya?" "Safe," Ethan said. "Root cellar. With my dog. Both fine." The relief on Daniel's face was profound. "Can I see her?" "Of course. This way." They headed back into the cabin, Ethan leading Daniel to the kitchen. He opened the trapdoor to the cellar. "Maya? It's over. Your uncle's here." There was a moment of silence, then the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Maya emerged, with Ranger right beside her. She looked exhausted, frightened, and relieved all at once. "Uncle Danny!" she cried, and threw herself into his arms. Daniel caught her, holding her tight. His eyes were wet as he buried his face in her hair. "You scared me, sweetheart. You scared me so much." "I'm sorry," Maya whispered. "But I couldn't let them die. I just couldn't." "I know," Daniel said, pulling back to look at her. "And you were right to do what you did. You were brave and smart, and you saved lives. But God, Maya, you could have been hurt. But I wasn't," she pointed out. "And Commander Cross kept me safe, and Ranger." She knelt down to hug the dog, who accepted her affection with patient dignity. Daniel looked at Ethan, a wealth of emotion in his eyes. "I don't have words big enough to thank you." "She saved me first," Ethan said simply. "We're even." Over the next 48 hours, the full scope of Dale Pritchard's operation came to light. It was worse than even Ethan had suspected. The FBI seized the freight yard and discovered in their raid shipping containers filled with stolen military weapons, enough to arm a small militia. Hidden in the maintenance buildings were processing labs for fentanyl production, using precursor chemicals smuggled in from Canada. And in a refrigerated container that had only been there for 3 days, they found what made even hardened federal agents feel sick. 6 people, 4 adults, and 2 teenagers, who'd been trafficked from Central America and were being held until they could be transported to various locations across the Northwest for forced labor. The people were alive, barely. Hypothermic, dehydrated, and terrified, but alive. The paramedics rushed them to hospitals in Helena and Missoula. Their rescue made national news. Dale Pritchard, faced with overwhelming evidence and the testimony of multiple witnesses, made a decision that surprised no one who understood his character. He rolled on everyone. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he provided detailed information about the entire trafficking network, names, locations, financial transactions, corrupt officials in 3 states. Sheriff Warren Hodge was arrested in his office, along with 2 of his deputies. The county clerk, Patricia Green, broke down and confessed that she'd been coerced into falsifying records. In exchange for her testimony, she received immunity. Her grandson, who Pritchard had threatened, was placed into protective custody. The operation had been running for 5 years, generating millions of dollars in illegal revenue. Pritchard had been the local face, but he'd been working for a larger organization based in Seattle. The FBI's Seattle field office opened a major investigation that would ultimately lead to 37 arrests across 4 states. But for Ethan, the most important moment came 3 days after the confrontation, when he and Ranger were finally allowed to leave the safe house and return to, well, he wasn't sure where to return to. His cabin rental was part of an active crime scene. His 30 days of leave were over. He needed to report back to his command for outprocessing. He was sitting in a conference room at the FBI's Helena field office, giving his final statement when Maya appeared in the doorway with Agent Reeves. "Commander Cross?" she said hesitantly. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" "Of course," Ethan said, gesturing to the chair beside him. Ranger, who'd been lying at his feet, immediately perked up at Maya's presence, his tail wagging. Maya sat down, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I wanted to give you something," she said, "before you leave." She pulled a small package from her backpack and handed it to him. It was wrapped in comic book pages, the Sunday funnies from a newspaper, and tied with kitchen twine. "It's not much," she said quickly, "but I wanted you to have it." Ethan carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a small carved wooden dog, clearly handmade. It looked like a German shepherd, or rather, like a Belgian Malinois. The craftsmanship was simple but careful, the work of someone who'd spent real time on it. "My grandpa taught me to carve," Maya explained, "before he died. I've been working on this for the past 2 days. It's supposed to be Ranger, but I'm not very good yet, so it might not really look like him." Ethan turned the small carving over in his hands, genuinely moved. "It's perfect," he said quietly. "Thank you, Maya. I wanted you to have something to remember," she continued, her words coming faster now, as if she'd been practicing this speech. "Because you're going back to the Navy, and I'm going back to school, and we probably won't ever see each other again. But I wanted you to know that I'll never forget you. And I hope maybe sometimes you'll think about that night and remember that it turned out okay, that we all survived." Ethan looked at this small, serious girl who had more courage in her than most of the warriors he'd served with. "Maya, I'm not going back to the Navy." She blinked in surprise. "You're not?" "No. I put in my separation papers. I'm retiring. And as for not seeing each other again," he smiled, "I don't think that's going to be a problem." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've spent the last 3 days talking to your Uncle Daniel and Dr. Martinez about a project we want to start. A foundation, actually. We're going to call it SHIELD, and its mission is going to be finding people who fall through the cracks, people the regular system can't or won't help." Maya's eyes went wide. "Like you fell through?" "Exactly like that. Your uncle brings his FBI resources and federal connections. Dr. Martinez brings his medical expertise and knowledge of the community. And I bring my tactical training and apparently a talent for attracting trouble." "What about me?" Maya asked, a note of hope in her voice. "You," Ethan said seriously, "are the reason we're doing this. You're our inspiration. You're the reminder that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they decide that injustice isn't acceptable. So I'd like you to be part of it too. Maybe not the dangerous parts, at least not until you're older. But the planning, the organizing, the being a voice for people who need help? Yeah, we need you for that." Maya's smile was so bright it could have lit up the room. "Really?" "Really. That is, if your grandmother approves." "She will," Maya said, with absolute confidence. "She said she's proud of me. She said I did what my parents would have done, which is the best thing anyone's ever said to me." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "Your parents would be very proud, Maya. You're an exceptional young woman." As Maya left the conference room, Agent Reeves stepped in, a knowing smile on his face. "You know you just adopted a 12-year-old, right?" he said. "Not officially," Ethan replied. "But yeah, I'm aware. That kid deserves to know she's valued, that what she did mattered. And besides, every team needs someone to keep them honest. Someone to remind them why they're doing this. You really starting a foundation?" "Yeah. I've got my separation pay, some savings. Javier's already got non-profit paperwork filed. We're serious about this." Daniel sat down, his expression becoming more serious. "There are a lot of people like you out there, Ethan. Veterans who've seen things, who notice patterns, who have skills most civilians don't. And there are a lot of situations, like Maya's kids, who witness things, who know something's wrong, but don't have the power to fix it alone. What you're proposing? Connecting those two groups? It could actually work. That's the plan. You'll need help. Resources, official support for when things get complicated. Are you offering?" "I'm saying that the FBI is very interested in community partnerships that help us identify and investigate cases we might not otherwise hear about. And if SHIELD becomes that kind of partner, well, we'd be happy to provide whatever support we can within legal guidelines." Ethan extended his hand. "Then I think we have an understanding." They shook, and Ethan felt something shift in his chest. For months, he'd been preparing to leave the military and figure out what came next. He'd been afraid that his skills, his training, his experiences would have no place in civilian life, that he'd be lost without the structure and purpose of the teams. But maybe there was another path. Maybe he could build something new. Something that used everything he'd learned, but directed it toward a different mission: protecting the vulnerable, finding the lost, being the backup that arrives when you've given up hope. It wasn't what he'd planned when he came to Ashford looking for peace. It was better. 6 months later, the Cascade County Courthouse was packed for the sentencing hearing. Dale Pritchard, Marcus Lowe, and 5 other members of their organization sat at the defense table in orange jumpsuits, their faces carefully blank. Maya sat in the gallery with her grandmother, Dr. Martinez, on one side and Ethan on the other. Ranger, wearing an official service dog vest, lay at Ethan's feet. The judge had granted special permission for the dog to be present, given his role in the case. The prosecutor, a formidable woman named Ellen Cho, stood to address the court. "Your Honor, these defendants operated a criminal enterprise that spanned 5 years and multiple states. They trafficked in weapons, drugs, and human beings. They corrupted law enforcement officials and public servants. And when they feared exposure, they attempted to murder a decorated Navy SEAL and his service dog by tying them to active railroad tracks." She paused, letting the brutality of that image settle over the courtroom. They would have succeeded had it not been for a 12-year-old girl named Maya Reeves, who had the courage to risk her own safety to save 2 lives. Maya heard these men planning murder. She went into danger to prevent it. And when the system failed her, when the very people who should have protected her were the ones committing the crimes, she found another way. Ellen turned to look at Maya, who sat up a little straighter under the attention. "This case represents both the worst and the best of humanity," Ellen continued. "The worst in the greed and cruelty of these defendants. The best in the courage of a child who refused to look away from injustice." The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Patricia Blackwood, looked over her reading glasses at the defendants. "Does the defense wish to address the court before sentencing?" The defense attorneys conferred briefly with their clients. Then one of them stood. "No, Your Honor." There was nothing left to say. The evidence was overwhelming, the confessions detailed. The only question now was how severe the consequences would be. Judge Blackwood reviewed her notes, then delivered her ruling. "Dale Pritchard, you organized and led this criminal enterprise. You corrupted public servants, endangered lives, and attempted to commit murder. I hereby sentence you to 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole." Pritchard's face remained blank, but his hands tightened on the table. Marcus Lowe, as Pritchard's second-in-command and the direct participant in the attempted murder of Commander Cross, "I sentence you to 35 years. She continued down the line, each defendant receiving sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years. When she finished, she set down her gavel and looked directly at the defendants. "You chose evil. You chose profit over humanity. And when your crimes were discovered, you chose to compound them with attempted murder. The fact that you failed is due to the courage of others, not any mercy on your part. I hope you spend your decades in prison reflecting on the harm you've caused." The bailiffs led the defendants away. Pritchard turned once as he reached the door, his eyes scanning the gallery until they found Ethan. The hatred in that gaze was palpable. Ethan met his stare calmly, one hand resting on Ranger's head. He didn't grin or gesture or show any triumph. He simply looked back, steady and unmoved, until Pritchard was forced to turn away. After the sentencing, there was a press conference on the courthouse steps. Agent Reeves spoke about the FBI's ongoing investigation into the larger trafficking network. Dr. Martinez discussed the medical care provided to the survivors who'd been found in that refrigerated container. All 6 had recovered and were now in protective custody, receiving help to build new lives. And Ethan, who had never sought publicity and wasn't comfortable with it now, gave a brief statement about SHIELD. "We've been operational for 4 months, he said, reading from notes because public speaking wasn't his strong suit. "In that time, we've assisted in 12 cases involving missing persons, suspected trafficking, and vulnerable individuals who needed help but couldn't access traditional resources. We work in partnership with law enforcement, not in place of them. And we're always looking for people who want to make a difference. A reporter called out, "Commander Cross, what would you say to people who might be in situations like Maya Reeves was in? People who witness crimes but feel powerless?" Ethan looked at Maya, who was standing with her grandmother, and smiled. "I'd say that courage doesn't require size or age or special training. Courage is seeing something wrong and deciding you can't live with yourself if you don't at least try to do something about it. Maya saved my life, and Ranger's life. But she also saved 6 people who were trapped in a container and countless others who would have been victimized by this network in the future. She did that by refusing to believe she was too small to matter." He paused, then added, "We're all bigger than we think we are. We all have more power than we believe. Sometimes it just takes one person willing to take that first step." The reporters loved it. The story went national. Girl, dose, saves Navy SEAL, and dog from train tracks, exposes major trafficking ring. Maya became a minor celebrity for a few weeks, though her grandmother carefully shielded her from too much attention. But for Ethan, the real victory came 2 weeks after the sentencing, when SHIELD got its first official request for help. It came from a woman in Billings whose teenage daughter had disappeared 3 months ago. The police had filed a missing person report, but had no leads. The case had gone cold. They said she probably ran away. The woman sobbed over the phone to Javier, who'd taken the call at SHIELD's small office. They said there was nothing more they could do. But my daughter wouldn't just leave. She wouldn't. Something happened to her, and no one is looking. Javier looked at Ethan, who was working on another case file, and at Maya, who was organizing their database of resources and contacts. "Mom," Javier said, "we're looking. Give us everything you have. Recent photos, description, last known location, names of friends. We'll find your daughter." After the call, Maya looked up from her computer. "Do you think we can really find her?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "But we're going to try. That's what we do now. We try when everyone else has given up." Ranger, who'd been sleeping under the desk, lifted his head and looked at Ethan with those wise amber eyes. "Yeah, I know," Ethan said to his dog. "We're not retired. We've just got a different mission now." A better mission, he thought. One that didn't involve so much darkness and violence. One that was about building hope instead of delivering justice through force. Though, he reflected, touching the small carved dog that Maya had made him, which now sat on his desk, sometimes the two overlapped. Sometimes delivering justice was the only way to build hope, and he was perfectly fine with that. The SHIELD Foundation's new office was nothing fancy, just 3 rooms above a hardware store in Helena, Montana. But it had everything they needed: desks, computers, a secure server for sensitive information, and a small kitchen where the coffee was always fresh and always too strong. Ethan stood at the window, looking down at the street below, where normal life went on, people shopping, commuting, living their daily routines, without any idea of the darkness that sometimes lurked in the shadows. "Boss, we've got something," Maya called from her desk. At 13 now, she'd grown a few inches and had lost some of the uncertain hesitance that had defined her before that night on the railroad tracks. She was still quiet and serious, but there was a confidence in her voice that hadn't been there before. Ethan turned from the window. "What've you got? Remember the Billings case? The missing teenager?" Maya's fingers flew over her keyboard, pulling up files. "I've been monitoring social media accounts like you taught me, looking for patterns. 3 different accounts have been posting from the same location in Spokane, using similar filters and photo styles. One of them matches the missing girl's aesthetic." Ethan moved to look over her shoulder, Ranger rising from his bed in the corner to follow. The analysis was thorough and professional. Maya had been studying investigative techniques with the dedication of someone twice her age. "Good catch," Ethan said. "Forward this to Agent Reeves. If she's posting from Spokane, she might be in danger or might have run into a situation she can't get out of. FBI has the resources to move fast." "Already sent," Maya confirmed. "And I flagged it as priority. since the account activity suggests she might be under some kind of supervision, always posting at the same times, never responding to direct messages from family. Dr. Javier Martinez entered the office, carrying lunch from the deli downstairs. Is that the Spokane lead? Excellent work, Maya. I just got off the phone with the family. They've authorized us to share any information with law enforcement that might help locate their daughter. How are they holding up? Ethan asked. As well as can be expected. The mother said, just knowing someone is actively looking makes a difference. Even if we don't find her though, I believe we will. The hope matters. That had become S.H.I.E.L.D.'s unofficial motto. The hope matters. Even when outcomes were uncertain, even when cases stayed cold, the act of having someone who believed you and fought for you made a difference in people's lives. The office phone rang, and Ethan picked it up. S.H.I.E.L.D. Foundation, this is Ethan Cross. Commander Cross? An unfamiliar woman's voice, tense with barely controlled emotion. My name is Rebecca Watts. I'm calling from Oregon. My brother is a Marine veteran, and he went missing 3 weeks ago. The VA says he might have had a crisis related to PTSD, but my brother wouldn't just disappear. He has an 11-year-old son. He wouldn't leave his son. Ethan grabbed a notepad. Tell me everything, Mrs. Watts. As she talked, as he took notes and asked questions, Ethan felt the familiar sense of purpose settle over him. This was the mission now. Not hunting targets in distant countries, but finding the lost, protecting the vulnerable, being the answer when someone asked, "Who do I call when the system has failed me?" After the call, he updated the case board, a large whiteboard where they tracked active investigations. They now had 7 open cases, ranging from missing persons to suspected trafficking situations, to a cold case murder that a family had been trying to get reinvestigated for 10 years. We're getting more requests than we can handle, Javier observed, looking at the board. We might need to expand. Carefully, Ethan cautioned. This only works if we maintain standards. Everyone on the team has to be someone we trust completely. As if on cue, the office door opened, and Agent Daniel Reeves walked in, followed by a woman Ethan didn't recognize. She was in her 30s, with short dark hair and the alert, watchful posture of someone with military or law enforcement training. Ethan, Maya, Javier, Daniel said, I'd like you to meet retired Army Captain Sarah Chen. She was a criminal investigator with SEAD, 20 years of service, specializes in financial crimes and human trafficking cases. She's thinking about a career change. Sarah stepped forward, shaking hands with each of them. When she got to Maya, she didn't offer the patronizing attitude that some adults gave to kids in professional settings. She shook Maya's hand as an equal. I've read about S.H.I.E.L.D., Sarah said. What you did in Ashford and what you've been doing since. I spent 2 decades working within the system, and I saw how many people fell through the cracks. I'd like to help catch them. Ethan looked at Daniel, who gave a slight nod. The agent had already vetted her, which meant she was trustworthy. We can't pay much yet, Ethan said honestly. The foundation is still building its funding base. We rely on donations and grants. I have my military retirement, Sarah replied. I don't need to get rich. I need to do work that matters. Then welcome to S.H.I.E.L.D., Ethan said, shaking her hand again. We operate on 3 principles: protect the vulnerable, find the lost, and never give up on people the system has forgotten. If you can commit to that, you're part of the team. Sarah smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. I can commit to that. As the team gathered around the case board, discussing strategy for the Spokane lead and the new missing Marine veteran case, Ethan felt Ranger press against his leg. He looked down at his partner, who was watching the humans with patient understanding. We've come a long way, haven't we, boy? Ethan murmured. From being tied to railroad tracks and left to die, to building something that mattered. From being a victim of violence, to being a shield against it for others. Yeah, they'd come a long way, and they were just getting started. From the admissions file of Maya Reeves, applicant to the FBI Academy Training Program, essay prompt. Describe a formative experience that shaped your career goals. When I was 12 years old, I made a choice that changed my life. I overheard men planning to kill someone, and I had to decide whether to stay silent and safe or to speak up and risk everything. I chose to speak up. The man they planned to kill was Navy SEAL Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cross. They tied him and his military working dog to railroad tracks and left them to die. By pure chance and what my grandmother calls divine intervention, I found them just in time to divert the train that would have killed them. That night taught me 3 things that have shaped every decision I've made since. First, I learned that evil often hides behind respectability. The men who tried to commit murder were pillars of our community, the freight yard foreman, the county sheriff, trusted businessmen. They wore suits and smiled at church and helped with Little League. And behind those masks, they ran a trafficking operation that destroyed lives. This taught me that investigation requires looking beneath surfaces, questioning assumptions, and never accepting that someone is above suspicion simply because of their position. Second, I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. I was terrified that night. Terrified of the men who'd made the threat. Terrified that no one would believe me. Terrified that I was too small and too young to make a difference. But I also knew that if I did nothing, 2 lives would end and a criminal enterprise would continue destroying more lives. So I acted anyway. This taught me that doing the right thing often means doing the scared thing. Third, and most importantly, I learned that ordinary people have extraordinary power when they refuse to accept injustice. I wasn't anyone special. I was just a kid who happened to overhear something terrible. But I used the resources I had, my knowledge of the freight yards, my bicycle, my grandmother's trust in me, and I made a difference. This taught me that we don't have to wait for someone else to be the hero. We can be that person ourselves. After that night, I became part of the SHIELD Foundation, working with Commander Cross, Dr. Martinez, and my uncle, FBI Special Agent Daniel Reeves. For the past 3 years, I've assisted in investigations, learned analytical techniques, studied criminal behavior patterns, and seen firsthand how dedicated people can help those who've been failed by traditional systems. I've also seen the other side, how traffickers operate, how they choose victims, how they hide in plain sight. I've studied 17 cases now, from initial missing person report through investigation to resolution. I've learned that the best investigations combine analytical thinking with human empathy, that data matters, but so does intuition, and that the smallest detail can break a case wide open. This is why I want to join the FBI, not for the authority or the prestige, but because I've seen what's possible when skilled, dedicated people commit themselves to protecting the vulnerable. I've seen what one person with courage and training can accomplish, and I want to be that person, not just for one night on a railroad track, but for a lifetime of service. The men who tried to kill Commander Cross are in prison now. The trafficking network they ran has been dismantled. The 6 people we found in that refrigerated container have started new lives. And Commander Cross and Ranger are still out there, still finding people who need finding, still being the backup that arrives when hope is almost gone. That's the kind of agent I want to be. The one who shows up. The one who doesn't give up. The one a terrified 12-year-old would trust with an impossible story. Because I was that 12-year-old once, and someone believed me. Now I want to be the person who believes the next Maya Reeves, whoever and wherever they are. CTA Numer Ultras, thank you so much for watching until the end. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that heroes still exist. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments. What was your favorite moment? Was it Maya's courage, Ranger's loyalty, or the moment justice was served? We read every comment. God bless, and see you in the next story. The Montana wilderness stretched out in all directions, pristine and silent under a blanket of fresh snow. It was late afternoon, the sun painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose as it began its descent. Ethan Cross stood on the porch of a cabin, not the one from that night 5 years ago, but a new one he'd built himself on land he'd purchased with money from a book deal he'd never expected. Some journalist had written about the Ashford case, and it had become a bestseller. The royalties had funded S.H.I.E.L.D.'s expansion to 3 more states. Ranger, older now, with gray around his muzzle and a more deliberate way of moving, lay at his feet. The dog was officially retired from field work, spending his days as the office mascot and unofficial therapy animal for the family's S.H.I.E.L.D. served. Ethan's phone buzzed. A text from Maya, who was in her final week at the FBI Academy. "Just got my first assignment, Violent Crimes Against Children Division. I'm coming home to Montana, Commander. Looks like I'll be working near S.H.I.E.L.D. territory. Coincidence?" Ethan smiled and typed back, "No such thing as coincidence, kid. Welcome home," Ranger says, to bring bacon. A car pulled up the snow-covered drive, and Dr. Martinez emerged, followed by Sarah Chen and 2 new team members, a former Marine named Jack Terrell and a cybersecurity specialist named Yuki Tanaka. "Team meeting at your cabin?" Javier called out. "I thought we agreed to use the office." "I'm making dinner," Ethan replied. "And Ranger refuses to drive." They gathered inside around a table Ethan had built himself, reviewing case files and discussing strategy for a new investigation. The conversation was serious but warm, the interaction of people who'd become family through shared mission and shared trauma. "We've got 14 open cases," Sarah reported. 3 are close to resolution, the others are ongoing investigations. "And we received 23 new requests for assistance this month alone. We're going to need that 5th investigator position filled soon," Javier added. "Already working on it," Yuki confirmed. "I've got 3 solid candidates, all with military or law enforcement backgrounds, all vetted by Agent Reeves." As they talked, as they planned, Ethan felt the familiar sense of purpose that had replaced the emptiness he'd felt after leaving the SEALs. This was his team now. These were the people he'd go to war for. Not in distant countries against foreign enemies, but right here, in small towns and big cities, against the darkness that preyed on the vulnerable. Later, after the others had left, and it was just Ethan and Ranger watching the sunset, his phone rang. Unknown number, S.H.I.E.L.D. Foundation, Ethan Cross speaking. "Mr. Cross?" A young man's voice, shaking with emotion. "My sister went missing 2 weeks ago in Idaho. The police say she's probably a runaway, but she's not. She left her phone, her medications, everything. Something happened to her. I've been calling everyone I can think of, and someone told me about your organization. They said you help people when no one else will." Ethan reached for his notepad, his pen. "Tell me about your sister," he said. "Tell me everything. And then we're going to find her, because that's what they did now. They found people. They protected the vulnerable. They showed up when hope was almost gone, and they said, 'You're not alone anymore. We've got you.'" Outside the window, the last light of day faded into twilight. Somewhere out there was a missing girl who needed finding. Somewhere was a family who needed hope. And here, in this cabin in the Montana wilderness, was a team ready to provide both. The mission continued,